And then when I saw the bottom line, it was a little over 5% increase. I was concerned about bringing that much of a increase forward. So I called the administrative team together to talk about where we could find, some money to bring that down a bit. And this first sheet has a list of our priorities on the top. And one of the things that is been added here is the GT teacher. That was in our minutes, but it didn't, and when I looked at the budget and was looking at the bottom line, I realized that the actual cost of an additional GT teacher was not in the budget that I had shared with you. So that was one of those things that I know is in the strategic plan and we had talked about, so I felt like it was important for me to add that in and make that correction. So you'll see that at the bottom of your priority list, about 3/4 of the way down, halfway down the page.
Can you just talk a little bit about how that will change how we're delivering service to those students?
Yeah, so for our gifted and talented program for the last few years, they have only been receiving mostly consultation. So teachers receive consultation about the students that are identified for gifted and talented. And the classroom teacher is expected to deliver instruction to those students. So they may be a year or 2 or 3 years above grade level, and then the classroom teacher is trying to modify or differentiate the instruction to meet the needs of that student. And Elle Fainus is our gifted and talented teacher. She circulates across the entire district for our 4 schools, our 3 elementary and our middle school, and provides that consultation to staff. She also does some pull-out where she will do some enrichment activities with our gifted and talented students. Sometimes she puts on plays. They might do a research project. She right now has a community experts project that she's doing. She brings community members in that have various jobs, and they work with the kids. They show them what their skills are. So the amount of specialized instruction they get is limited to what the classroom teacher can provide. And so this year, one of the things that we found out is we had quite a few students in our math programs that needed more specialized instruction than we felt the classroom teacher could give. And so we had Elle specialize her attention on the math instruction. So she's actually pulling groups out, and in all 3 schools they've identified the students who need extended math, and she is doing the instruction rather than just consulting with the teachers. And one person covering 4 buildings is really inadequate for that kind of delivery. So our goal is that this year we would do that for math, and then next year we would consider adding a second person so that they're maybe only covering 2 schools, and they can do that for ELA and math. So that's where we are. So we added that back in. Again, like I said, it was in the minutes, and we had discussed it earlier. We just didn't end up with the money in the budget.
And the difference between the sheet we had last week and that is that one position, and that you've moved the feasibility out of that. Is that it?
Wendy thought that was confusing to have that there because that's not in our feasibility study's not in the general budget, and all the other items are. So she said that really shouldn't show up as a general priority item. It would be a separate item for us to discuss. So she said to make sure that this group realized that these priority items go in our general budget, she thought was important. And then if you look at the last section of the page, when I met with the administrative team to discuss their budgets and look at them by building and where they felt they might be able to make some cuts, this list below is where they felt they could make some cuts. So one of the things that came up at our last meeting, one of you folks asked, why did PCS budget $4.50 a gallon for heating fuel when everybody else budgeted $3.50 for heating fuel? And so once we realized there was a difference in how that number was estimated, we put PCS in line with everybody else at $3.50. That dropped that cost down $20,000. So we felt that was reasonable. The $3.50 was reasonable, and we made it equitable to what every other school was anticipating for fuel cost. The other increase that we had in the budget was for a halftime custodian at PCS, and we talked about the fact that the PCS lost a full-time custodian a few years ago to budget cuts, and we really felt like it was cut back too far. And so we added a halftime back in, and the conversation was that if we increase the sub line, the problem is when somebody's out, we have to have coverage. There's just not enough staff to cover. So a compromise was to increase the sub line so that when people are out on vacation, they have someone to cover, rather than hiring a half-time custodian, and that saved $7,200.
So that's a net figure of savings after
Yes.
you add something in.
Yes,
Right.
the halftime custodian was $11,700, and they looked at what they'd spent. Right now, they've spent $4,500 in sub costs, so we kind of anticipated what it would be for the rest of the year and put that number in. So the net savings is $7,200. Carrie said she's got extra in the supplies line. $300 isn't much, but she wanted to offer that up. She also said that she would go without her AmeriCorps staff member. She said, again, it's one of those things that if the money was there, she'd really like to have $7,000, not a lot of contribution on our part to get another staff member in there to support struggling students. But she said if something had to go, she thought that should be. The cameras, she put in for 5 new cameras. She said two new ones are essential in this lobby here and also in the hallway at Bruce Whittier. The cameras are so old that it's hard to even see who's in the image when they're looking at them. But she said she thought she could phase in the 5 cameras, 2 this year and 3 next year, and that would be wouldn't cause a big safety concern other than the 2. She said the 2 they felt were a safety concern, but the other 3 they could phase in next year. The TV studio, we looked at our grant money and we think we could eliminate some things that we have in our Title VI grant, and that could be a priority in the Title VI grant next year. So we felt like if we could cut that and it still hopefully have it, assuming the grant comes in as anticipated. And then when the principals were talking about the GT position, they really felt like that could be phased in as well, that maybe a halftime person would make a big enough impact that it would be all they needed. So if they said if we went with halftime GT next year, and then if we needed the full time, again, we could phase that in or increase that in another year. So that was what the administrative team came in with for cuts that they felt they were comfortable with, that they understood that our budget has increased a lot, and this isn't a huge reduction, but yeah, $75,000 is still $75,000. So again, you can see the bottom line. Here's our priority budget is at 90,000. I mean 900,000. It'd be nice if it were 90,000. So I don't know if anybody has comments on some of the decisions we made, or feel good about those. You have any questions?
No, personally, I'd love to see the AmeriCorps keep, because it's a small investment for something that has the potential for a direct impact for kids. So, but anyway,
I think if we thought the budget would go through and would be supported by voters, we definitely want
yeah.
that and these other items. And again,
And I appreciate Carrie kind of looking at her stuff and seeing
yeah.
what she can do, and I understand why that's doesn't we can dispense with.
Yeah.
But that's only one of the stuff that's listed here that I feel like is that kind of direct impact
Yes.
on struggling kids.
And right, when we're always trying to work with dropout, on our dropout prevention and the at-risk students, so that position does work with that population. So we're not saying if the board or even this committee wanted it back in, that we wouldn't be happy to put it back in and hope that voters support our bottom line budget.
Does anybody else have any comments or questions on that particular piece? I would just say thank you for the hard work, because I know it's tough.
So the next thing that you have is the revenue sheet, And you will see the first one has the the 5% insurance increase. So we were considering what Colleen had requested and said. I mean, our hope is that it comes in at 5%. And as I said, I don't feel real comfortable putting forward a budget that's only 5%, just because I'm worried that we'll,
Well, that's not a revenue issue, that's an expense issue.
yes.
Right.
So when you look at it, so she has I think it impacts our bottom dollar with our required local share and our additional, wouldn't it?
Oh, I see.
See, so that's what this is showing, and that's why she's letting us know if the insurance is down, that drops what the additional local is. And if you look at the bottom line there with only 5%, this would be, and again, if you look to the second page, the grand total expense, it's a 4% increase in the budget, $774,000.
So does this reflect this priority list?
Yes,
Okay, so it's working from this
yes, from the changes,
900,000
Yes.
basically, and then- but only at 5% for the insurance.
yes,
With the net priority list.
yes.
Last time we had some discussion about fund balance forward,
Mhm.
and I guess my question is what we have here, are we comfortable with that, or do you have anybody else? And can you just refresh me on what that leaves us?
Yes, so right now, our fund balance, we'd be left with, I think it was around $250,000 that we have in our fund balance right now. Well, what we would be left with. We have $249,000, so close to another $250,000 of money that we didn't spend, which is that additional money we got from the state after the voters had their votes. So that gets us up to about $500,000, and we are expecting to have some money left over from this year's budget that we haven't spent. So there's a possibility of there being around $600,000, and that's, again, we're just estimating right now. We still have a bit of this school year to go. So, if there were $500,000 in there, we were figuring that's about half. That's a pretty safe amount because it leaves enough for next year's budget. But we could increase that and hope that we have, like $600,000 at the end of the year, and again, $300,000 would be half, or we could go up to 270. I think it was 270 that we used last year. So I would be open for discussion on that.
Actually, can you refresh me, does this include capital improvement?
So, this is our general budget here.
Right.
So our general budget does not include capital improvement.
So in terms of, if we're discussing an increase in the budget.
Yes.
Looking at it from that angle.
Yes.
So
So you'll-
once we go through everything, then we'll
We
wanna
have
a
another,
bottom line
yeah,
that will
we have another,
include that.
yes,
Okay.
yeah. And that would include the feasibility study
Mhm.
as well. So that's, yes. This sheet, though, is just our general budget. Okay. So yeah, right on this sheet is just the general piece, so we still have some more information to share. So does anybody have a thought about the fund balance being at $250,000? You think that's enough, or we should go up any? One of the things about leaving it this way is if we do get to a bottom line where our insurance is 6%, or again, that could be a place where we could tap to make up a difference if we needed to.
And we think we'll know the insurance rate figure before this goes to the
Yeah.
town meeting style
So-
in the middle of May, so.
Yes, we should know by then, and I was watching the town leaders meeting, the videotape of that, this weekend, and that was on March 26th last year as well, which is
That's
kind
what
of
you do for fun
interesting.
on the
I
weekend?
know.
That's awesome.
I have quite a life. And at that meeting, Mike announced that he had just heard that day, and it was on
Yeah.
March 26th. So if we'll be fortunate, I hope we're that fortunate and that we know next week as well, but I don't know if that was typical or if we got them earlier than usual last year or what. But he found out before we even had to go to our town meetings, like our budget presentations, and so we were able to pull out the additional insurance costs before we even went to those, which was nice. I don't know if that would happen
Yeah,
this
I
year.
was gonna say, it seemed to me that most of the numbers were in place by the time Poland had
Yes.
their annual town meeting.
Yeah, so that's what we're
Oh.
hoping, but right now, like I said, this one shows it at 5%, which is $126,000 less than savings if it's the half. It's $126,000 for 5%. So if you'll look to the next page, this is the one that Kim was talking about, which has, you have to have, like a microscope to see the top. But at the very top here, it says this one includes the local for K-12, adult ed at $70,000, $80,000 for capital improvement, $10,000 for technology reserve, and $100,000 for the feasibility. So if you have everything, our priority list, as I just explained it, and all of those additional articles, this is what it looks like, remembering that we've only got 5% for the insurance in this sheet.
All right, so just to be 100% sure, what this shows us is what the mill rate would be for the entire budget as proposed with the priority list, and then adding in those separate warrant articles that would be the adult ed, the SIP, the technology, and then the feasibility study.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Anybody need me to read those numbers,
Nope,
or?
I can see the numbers, I
Okay.
just couldn't see the.
For those
I can
people
read
that
it.
are maybe at home, Mechanic Falls, the total annual change would be $30.40 per $100,000 house. For Minot, it would be $28.47, and for Poland, it would be $26.77.
And that's if our insurance only increases by
If-
5%.
Absolutely. And I've got another sheet for the 10%.
Right,
That's for the-
Yes.
for 100,000.
Yeah. Any questions?
Questions on that?
So, the next sheet that you have is our, total budget, with everything. The revenues and the approved budget for 14-15 and the difference. And Wendy made this for us, before she had to leave today. So I'll give you just a moment. One of the things that you'll notice here, so if you look at the top where it has our total operating budget, debt service, capital improvement reserves, if you look at 14-15, that number is 147,000. That includes the 60,000 we expect to carry over, plus next year's 80,000. So we don't just show what is in this year's budget. So that's a little bit different than the other things you've been looking at. Same with adult ed. So it's the entire adult ed budget, the 220,000, not just the 70,000. That is the local cost.
So that's if I'm reading that correctly, that's a 4.44%.
Yes.
Increase year over year, when we're including all of the additional warrant items that
And
are
the-
outside the actual
Yeah,
school budget.
debt service and the capital improvements, yes. And you can also see on that page, the second one down on the bottom section, that would make the additional local 1.4, 1.5 million. Any questions? So the second section that you have in front of you is the exact same information, but if it's 10% on insurance. And like I said, we don't think we're gonna be that high. The, information we have is indicating more towards the 5%, but because we don't know, all area superintendents put in 10%, and that felt, comfortable, because we know that's the highest it will be. I'll just give you a minute to look over that. You'll see on the grand total on the front, it's a 4.67%.
That has a big impact.
It does, that one thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's,
Pretty big impact.
it's a bigger impact than I would have expected, because it felt like when we did it with and without the feasibility study, it didn't have as much of an impact, and that's around this dollar
Right.
figure.
About a quarter, yeah, 25% higher.
Yep. So in this case, doing everything, including the separate warrant items, all the priority lists, and the feasibility study using 10% for the insurance.
Well, this front page is our general budget,
Yep.
and then, yes,
Yeah,
when
I'm
you
sorry,
go,
I'm looking at the mill rate.
oh, okay, yes.
I'm at the mill rate.
If you go to the mill rate, absolutely, that,
Yeah,
again, it
that's the
says
figure
at
that
the,
jumps more than I would have
Yes.
expected. So it's 45, so where before, to do everything with a 5% insurance, was $30.40 in Mechanic Falls for an impact on the mill rate. If you do it all the stuff we talked about, and use the 10% for insurance, it's $45.67, so it's $15 more per mill. And it's about the same in mine, and a little bit, only about $10 more, in Fulton. So we're hoping for 5%?
yes, we're hoping for 5%, and, we also can have that discussion of, do we bring the feasibility study down to 90,000? Do we cut the 10,000 technology reserve, knowing that, we have a pretty robust technology budget? Do we, decide not to do a reserve? We haven't done the reserve for quite a long time. And, again, when we're trying to bring this down into, a reasonable level that our taxpayers can support, we want to make sure our, teachers get the salaries that are competitive, or at least get them closer to where, the averages are, but, are there some places that we could cut? Those would be a couple of things we could think about, even if it's, like I said, it only brings us 20,000, but 20,000 is 20,000.
I think the second one that includes the 10% is, I think, more than what our taxpayers can bear.
I would agree with that.
So, I think we need to find a way to keep it within the 5% that we're looking at, that number, whether that ends up being the insurance, if it comes in, just taking more out of, if it's higher than 5%, taking that out of fund balance and putting more fund balance into it.
And of course, as we get closer to the end of the school year, we'll have a really good handle on what's going to be left in our fund balance. So those decisions can be made as we get feedback from our communities, and that's, the goal of the community presentations is that people will come out and give us feedback to say, we are really supportive of, the schools, and we agree with you, we want this budget to pass, or we need to hear, you need to bring it down some, and then we go to do the hard work of, all right, we've got a bunch of priority items we know are important, but we need to be responsive to the community as well.
The thing that I wanted to just put back on the table we talked about last week is I feel like the school committee has a big decision to make about how to handle the feasibility study. Because like that's the first step, and that's $100,000 is a big investment. So my personal feeling, and it's up to the school committee, my personal feeling is that I think we're better off to have that as a separate item and present a budget without that, and then have that as a separate warrant and explain what the fiscal impact of that would be, so that we don't risk the school budget for, and I would hate to go back and cut items on the priority list to be able to include the feasibility study
Right.
if there's not an appetite in the communities to go down that road, because to make that investment in the feasibility study means that you're preparing to give, you're not committing to, but you're preparing to make a serious consideration to do a locally bonded addition to the middle school.
Right.
And I think that's a piece that people need to be able to give consideration to on its own merits, and to not have that impact whether they support or don't support the school budget. And I'd hate to have that interfere with our ability not only to pass our own budget, but particularly to get to the priority items which have direct educational impact. Not that the facility and building that the kids who receive that education doesn't have an impact as well.
So how would you handle a feasibility study?
Well, you'd have it as a separate warrant article, and then you could have an explanatory note that explains, what the additional tax impact would be of that 100,000, spread across the towns, and then when you have to do it at the ballot.
Not to oversimplify it, I guess that's what I am doing. A feasibility study, you people are a feasibility study, you know what you need to do. So you're gonna pay somebody to tell you what you already know?
So, Kim, do you want to speak to the feasibility study and the work that we would need to have done? You've done a lot of work on it, so.
Sure, absolutely. So, what the feasibility study would involve would be looking at the buildings as they exist now, looking at the grounds. We've got the whole situation in Poland with the aquifer overlay situation, so there's all that part to be looked at and consider. Take a look and see if anything could be done creatively with the building that would be less expensive, for example. And then if we found that we could go forward in that way, it would be concept design. So what is it that we're looking out, a number of years that we know it was coming, that we're gonna need for enrollments? And how would we design the building to make sure it was gonna meet our needs? So there's several parts that would add up to that. And then that concept design, of course, you have a building committee together at that point who's taking a look at all this work as it comes in to decide, is this something we want to move forward with? Is it something that our communities can support? Is it
Not
not?
to ask a silly question, but, this place was built 15 years ago. Where was the feasibility study then? They didn't look out, they didn't look forward any more than 15 years, or maybe they can, I don't know.
Well, the reason that it's in the strategic plan because we know we have some overcrowding currently in the middle school, and that's impacting high school as well. We also have some overcrowding we're at capacity at Poland Community School, for example.
Well, and when this building was built and Whittier was built, it was intended only to house the kids from Poland. Because Minot kids went K-8 and Elm Street kids went K-8. It was only a few years ago that we decided to consolidate the middle schools and move everybody over here for a variety of reasons. And so that's contributing to the space.
That was kind of decided for us, actually,
Well,
It was decided by the members of the community when
by the governor.
No, not the middle
Not
school
the middle school.
consolidation. No, that was a purely local decision, yeah. Yeah. The RSU, the transition from School Union 29 to RSU 16, that was one that came from Augusta.
Call it a chicken or call it a pig.
Yeah.
So when we're thinking about the feasibility study, it could be that we go through the first part of it, or we find out from the communities that they don't support a renovation, but if we still have the space issue, it may be that we get another modular,
I don't mean to dwell on it, it just seems like a feasibility study, you people are a feasibility study. I mean, if you come forward with it.
Right.
What-
So we know we have capacity issues. We can tell you we need more space, but we can't tell, because of the aquifer, there are certain things that have to happen to the land. So what we were told is the land, I think Mariella could speak to this a little bit, but just to put a modular there, we have to do some prep to the land that would cost us $30,000. So that's what a feasibility study does. We have to get somebody in here that can say you're allowed to do this and you're not, because we have a lot of restrictions, and schools have, schools have to meet, a lot of safety and construction regulations that, yes. So part of it's environmental, part of it is just what do you have to have, if you're going to house, have a school. So.
Yeah, I think what she's, so included in the feasibility is the survey work, the site design, rough site design, you know, having an architect do a rough concept design, well, you know, you want this many square feet and whatever. So it actually includes, I think, part of the architectural design. So it's more than what the board would be doing.
I mean, it has to be done, it has to be done.
Right.
And in some ways, it's not part of the budget.
Right, well, but, and what I was gonna say is that, you know, while I think it makes sense from a strategic standpoint, and to really let the community be clear about whether they wanna go, where the school committee may say, well, but here's the reality, we have significant capacity issues, they're only gonna get worse, not better, and if we don't begin to go down this road now, we're gonna spend 5 years playing catch-up, and the kids' learning is gonna be negatively impacted in the meantime, and so as a school committee, we feel like this is our
Obviously-
recommendation to the community, so.
Obviously, you wanna face the problem next year, not 5 years,
Yeah, yeah,
obviously.
right.
Yeah.
The feasibility studies, it's the
Yeah.
responsible thing to do, it has to be done.
And, you know, we agree with Colleen. It would be nice to have, we want to have it as a separate warrant article so that we do get clear feedback from the community as we want to go forward with the renovation concept, or if that doesn't happen, you know, do we see about how much it would be for another modular, and again, that's temporary, but maybe it gets us through another 5 years when the town would be more receptive. So there's, you know, a pretty important decision to be made, and we have been in this situation for how many years since the middle school, 3 or 4? And so it's really easy to push that back another year because it is a big ticket item, but eventually we have to address it.
When this place was built, it was financed by the state.
Yes.
Or revolving.
Yes.
What's been 20 years?
It's been about
14.
14 years.
And it was for 20, I mean, is there a point where it would ever be paid for?
Yes, and you can see our debt service has gone down. I'm trying to remember which page that's on right here, I think.
Now, while you're
Second
looking for
page.
that, I was just gonna say that we've always, many communities in Maine, their student population is declining, but we find we're actually growing. And we've always had some space issues because we've always had to have some modulars at
Right.
elementary schools. And we prefer not to do the modulars. And so we've been able to, well, because the kids have to be going in and out, back and forth, and it's just, they're very inefficient. So it's trying to do that long-term planning for communities that seem to continue to grow.
Are there any
So-
options to divide out the different aspects of the feasibility study? And what I mean by that is when I think of $100,000 for a feasibility study, it's a little bit, really? I mean, because I'm not even thinking, when I think feasibility, I'm thinking about the things that we talked about, like looking at the land and looking at, you know, what's the possibilities. I'm
Yeah.
not thinking about potential designs.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if when you look at how that breaks out, I would, I'm guessing, because I have no idea how much this kind of stuff costs, but I'm assuming that those designs is probably a bigger chunk of the money than the other piece of it. So I don't know, I'm asking those questions and whether
So-
that's something to consider.
Right, so part of it is that you wouldn't just, you'd bid out, of course, if you went forward with that, but you wouldn't just say, here's the contract, you would say, you know, piece by piece, there are different costs to that amount. So, for example, if after they did the groundwork and we had problems and we, sorry, you can't build here, that's done, we're done with that. We're not gonna be spending more money because we know the answer to that part right there.
And-
I just wonder, you know, as we're talking about it with the communities, I mean, I just wonder if it's gonna be sort of difficult for people to think about $100,000 as opposed to saying, you know, we wanna do this feasibility study, you know, which, just to see what our potential is, and that's gonna cost 25,000 or something. I just think that's easier for people to understand and also to probably accept than if someone says, I wanna do a feasibility study, I need $100,000. That
They
to me
give you a
seems like
concept
lot.
design for a building you haven't decided you
Yeah.
want
Right.
to build yet.
Or if you can, or
So-
even if you can, depending on the land and the permits and.
In the at the superintendent's meeting that we were at last week, we talked about this as a group a little bit, because of course other people are doing building projects as well. And they did say, wasn't it around 30,000 would be for the actual feasibility part?
For just that, grounds work.
Yes, and so they said the more of it is the actual design. So, you know, I think what Colleen was saying is to explain out what comes with that is a possibility, or we could start much smaller and just do the feasibility part of it, but then what happens is it pushes us out a whole another year. So then you've got to do the, do they want to build a building, and then
And
you've got to do the
signal you need from the community.
right, do they support? So that's the challenge of, I mean, I think we could explain it, what would be included in that 90,000 or 100,000, whatever, you know, we go forward with,
But
but,
couldn't the warrants be separate? Like, so couldn't you have, like, do you approve up to 35,000 to do like a site review, that sort of thing, and approve up to 60,000, you know, if the, you know, if the land is, you know, where we could build, do you approve up to 60,000 for design, potential build? You know, I'm just, and I know what you're saying, it pushes it out a year, and it's not as nicely packaged, but my only concern is, $100,000 is a lot of money, and my only concern is, what's our goal? And if our goal is to really find out what, you know, are we able to build, or do we have to look at other options, then I'm just wondering if doing it one step at a time, people would maybe approve that more easily than $100,000 for the whole package.
Well, I think that's one thing that the board, it's really hard for us to be able to predict without having someone come in how you would portion that. But that's what the board would do, is, you know, you would go out for your first initial evaluation and get prices for that. So they would be coming back to the board, and the board would be saying, okay, we're gonna authorize $25,000 for this. So it isn't that the board would be authorizing in one lump sum the total amount.
No, I understand that,
So-
but aren't we, as part of the warrant, we're talking about having people vote on whether
Yeah.
they wanna approve like $100,000 for a feasibility study? So that's what I'm talking about. I'm concerned that people are gonna see that and say, oh my God, site work, $100,000, because they're not, and I think communication is key, but I just have concerns that people are gonna think it's like sort of too much all at once in one package when you don't even know if you can build.
Well, they're
but
gonna
we're
say, when
planning
did we
for
decide to
designs.
build in the middle school?
Yeah.
That's what they're gonna say.
So one thing I just wanna just keep everybody thinking about too is that we know that there are housing project developments that are in
Right.
planning processes now, and that potentially could have impact on our schools. And so that it's difficult because the timeline is that we're trying to put something in place for a year from now, basically, you know, starting July 1st, but we know we could have further impact as far as enrollments increasing sooner than that. And so we're trying to figure out how to make that work.
But potentially you could have two warrant items, is that correct? Like, could you have a warrant item that, I mean, I'm just, the rules, but can you have a warrant item that says we authorize up to 30,000 or 35,000 to do the site work and the evaluation, blah, 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 and then we authorize up to 60,000 or 65,000 or whatever for design, potential designs, if the site, you know,
If
is
the site is
acceptable.
determined to be suitable.
Right.
Right.
Do you further approve?
so the only one, you know, I don't think there's question about whether we could build here. The question is whether the voters will support us to put the money in a permanent structure. What we were talking about is not knowing if we could build is for the garage at central office. That's come up in our conversations, but
I thought you were.
Oh, I
Well,
thought
no,
so too.
Right?
Actually, I was. I think we
Okay.
shouldn't be positive until we have somebody look
Yeah.
at it. That's the thing, because we do have the aquifer overlay protection. Yeah.
Mariella, do you have any?
My understanding is that we probably would be able to do something, but that there would be a lot more stormwater permitting involved, which involves a lot more survey and site design. So, and those are all things that
To some
happen
degree, but-
before you actually start building.
It only makes sense what you're saying, I mean, because of the aquifer, you've got 30, 40 buses sitting on top of the ground down there.
No, this is, we're talking about up here. So those would actually be permitted as two, well, they might go in together, but they don't actually affect each other in terms
But
of,
everything is, like, you know, you got your town sewer here.
right.
It's not like, everything's close to.
It has to do with the wetlands around it, and the runoff, the stormwater runoff.
Most of that.
Right, and so that's what I was saying, is, that when we got the approvals for the modulars that we have, and for the boiler building, at that time, we were told that if we went to do, and there were other expansions that had been tentatively approved by the town, but in terms of DEP, that we will have to go back, and there probably will be stormwater design involved.
So just to maybe pull the conversation back up for a second, the space I think that we landed on, if I was hearing Mary earlier, is that if it turns out that the insurance does in fact come in at 5% or something approximating 5%, this group is comfortable recommending to the school committee to support the budget as proposed with the net, what I call the net priority list, including the funding for the feasibility study, with the recommendation that the school committee have a conversation about how to handle the feasibility study and whether that gets rolled in or is handled as a separate warrant item. I don't think we're of a single
Right.
mind about how to do that. And so all I would ask is that the school committee have a deliberate conversation about the right way to do, not the right way, but the kind of the best way to do that, to have people feel informed, as they're making their decision about supporting it.
Mary Ellen?
And I think I was kind of envisioning this as we would get this information, and that it would have broken down in it, okay, this is for all of the school budget except for this feasibility study, and then when we add the feasibility study, and it will be a separate vote, but here's how much it will increase your,
Right.
The taxes and the mill rate.
Yeah, that's what personally I would like to
Right,
see,
right,
but
right.
I'm not trying to presume to make that decision
No,
on
I-
behalf of the school committee or
Yeah.
even to represent the whole group.
And
I
as we're
think
looking
that's-
at this one here, it does include the $100,000.
It does include it, so we
feasibility, so it would
could just
be-
have 2 rows,
Right.
but
Right.
say, when you vote for the feasibility study, then this is what you're voting for, is for this additional amount.
Yeah, so I
And
think
that's-
I think the final calculation you need for the mill rate is everything all in at a 5% health insurance rate with no feasibility study. And then you compare that with the packet we have here that has all those things with the feasibility
Right.
study. And then you can see what the differential is to the
Yeah.
communities.
And that's what I don't know if you remember, that's what we looked at last time.
Okay.
But we
yeah,
looked
that
at,
would-
yeah.
But we didn't have it with the 5%, I didn't
No,
think.
we only had it with a 10%.
Right, so that's what I'm saying, is to do it with the
yeah,
5%.
that's very easy to do. It's just a matter of, plugging in the numbers into the formula.
Even though I think that maybe until we hear from the insurance company,
Right.
we need to leave it at the 10%, but we can say if we can have it with us, but we need to have the 10% there until we hear otherwise, from the insurance company. But we could say, well, if it comes back at that, and then we know that, it might be something where the first public meeting we have to give the 10% one. And then by the second public meeting, maybe we'll know, and we'll be able to pull that out and say, okay, now we're just going with the 3%.
Yeah.
And the difference is how much?
$130,000 is the difference between 5% and 10%. So that's about, it's a little over the feasibility study. And, if you,
Yeah, so I guess the question is, which one we're gonna present? I worry about the amount of with the 10% in, and it seems like.
Right, and that's why I was saying earlier that I felt like we were all on board, that if it in fact comes in at 5%, we're supportive of doing everything that's on here. And only leave for the school committee, it's all left to the school committee, but only ask the school committee to look at the question of how to present the feasibility study.
Right.
If in fact insurance comes back at 10%, then I think we actually need to go back and look at the priority list.
So if we presented it at 5%, then we would just have to have a discussion about, well, if it comes in at more than that, then where are
What
we
goes?
gonna come
Where,
with that
Right.
where is that gonna come from?
Yeah.
And I guess I'm more comfortable doing that than
okay.
presenting a number that we think is beyond what we're gonna get support for.
Okay.
I'm with Mary, because I think that if there's, if we were at 3% last year, there's nothing that we're aware of that's out of whack in terms of our experience rating. We know
Yes.
the range, then I think 5% is an appropriate best guess, and that 10% there's no reason to think that we would hit 10%. And so, and again, by the time that actual numbers are presented to the townspeople to vote on, we will know what the real number is.
Yes.
And so this is about how you make the public presentation to it, to say this is our best understanding based on blah, blah, blah. And if it's more, then we have to watch the minutes.
And then I think if it's more than 5%, that we'll need to go back to the priority list. We need to go back and consider fund balance again.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure that that's the number that we want for fund balance.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts, Dan or Erlen?
No,
Missy?
I think that's, no, I think that's a good plan.
Okay. So we have our first meeting next Wednesday at Elm Street. And actually, our first meeting is Tuesday, right at the moment is Tuesday for our town leaders. And I know that Erlen said you can't be there, right? No, Arlen Sanders can't be there from Minnet. And John Hawley can't be there. And John said to me today, well, why don't we just go to our town meetings instead of having a separate one for the town leaders. And again, we expressed the purpose of that was to get them the information before everybody else got it and give them an opportunity to share their feedback. So I saw John sent out an email to his staff, and they were of the mind that they would just as soon go to the Wednesday meeting at Elm Street than having a separate meeting. So I thought I would check with Arlen, because I don't know if there's, you know,
I think he said Dan was planning on coming
yeah.
to that.
Okay, Alan's gone for 10 days or so.
Right.
So when will that be?
So it was do you have the dates in front of you? I can pull them up on my.
Town one was next Tuesday.
I mean,
The town one is next
Would be
Tuesday. With the
Tuesday.
leaders, with the
Do you
town
have that
officials is
list? I
Tuesday.
can
And
pull it
then
up on my
and
computer if I
then-
need to.
all times,
What?
Yep. And then
Just the
Thursday-
town officials.
April 3rd
right here.
and
Right here.
Yep.
Thursday.
And then Thursday, April 3rd is the one at the Minot
Right.
School.
Yes.
That's the presentation to the.
So it'd be the
town.
next,
Right.
yeah, so it'd be the next
Tuesday.
Thursday, yeah.
Next Tuesday, already at 6.
Yeah, so the question has come up is whether the town leaders are planning to come to the town leaders meeting or whether they prefer to just go to their regular town meeting.
I don't know, I'm here as a taxpayer,
Yes,
and I'll be here,
okay.
but,
But you're telling the exact same thing you just said.
Yes,
right? So
yes, so that was the question that came up is, you know,
Do you
John
really need
Hawley
to have
said,
it?
yeah, is if the town officials plan to go to their regular town ones and they don't want a
Well, why don't we just
preview.
leave it to the town officials and say, if you'd like a separate meeting, we'll be happy to do it.
Yeah.
And if you feel like going to your town,
Yeah.
public presentation is
Yeah.
sufficient, then we'll do that.
not,
Because they may feel differently about it in mine than they do.
Right,
in Canada.
right.
obviously, people really find jobs, really, a lot of work broken down and whatnot, and many, very, very, very good. It, from Colin, I'm sure agree with me, when it comes to the budget, people are gonna be voting one or two numbers.
Yeah.
And not caring whether you put in this heating oil or pencils,
Right,
That's right. They're
which
gonna
is
vote.
kind of a shame.
Yep, they vote
Yes.
based on mill rate.
Well, and-
Exactly. And, you know, just speaking as a taxpayer, I mean, taxes are becoming hard for a lot of people.
Mhm.
We've got 3 or 4 foreclosure, a couple last year, we did more every year,
yeah,
and for various reasons.
right.
So, that's the reality.
Right. And I think that's why it's so important for us to make sure people have a clear understanding of what's in the budget and why, and what our process has been, what the district for a process has gone through for 5 years now, which is pretty significant reductions of, you know, year after year, and having that conversation about where our salaries are compared to what I would call, you know, either the regional average or the state average, and are we at fair market value, to put it an easy way?
Not be critical, but where are the salaries of people paying for the salaries?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I know, that, you know, it's an issue for everybody right now, and, you know, I remember last year at this meeting, one of you folks, and I don't remember which one it was, saying, make sure the community knows the sacrifices that the teachers have made over the last 4 budgets, because that was the conversation. It's really important for people to know that they took furlough days, you know, in 2011. They had frozen salaries, no steps in 2012. They had a 1% in 2013 and a 2% this year for the first time, and haven't had a step for experience in all 4 of those years. So there have been some really significant sacrifices and commitment on the district's part and of the staff to make sure those budgets are reasonable, and there comes a point where you've gotten so far behind that you have to make some increases to keep your staff. We hired 15 new teachers this year, and that was a significant number. And when that happens, you have to start questioning how far below the average you are, and whether you're going to really be losing the best staff that you have.
And I think that's the point to key in on, is the quality and the continuation of the staff,
Yeah.
not salary. Because I can tell you, just like Dan's saying, I mean, so many people, like you're saying, oh, they didn't get an increase one year and they got 1% the next year. You know what?
2 years. Yeah.
Many people.
They're gonna
have
say,
gotten
"So did I,"
increases in
right?
Yeah.
Years,
Yeah.
years.
Right.
I'm not saying 1 or 2. I mean, it's been like 4 or 5 years people
Yeah.
don't get increases, and people are losing their jobs. So that's really a touchy subject.
Yeah.
Like salary increases is really, and stipends, those are hot ticket items. So I would not, what's the reason for that? And the
Right.
reason is we wanna make sure that we do have quality teachers. We wanna make sure that we're maintaining the teachers that we have for the students, and the consistency of having those, and not having like huge turnover every year. I mean, those are the points that people, I
Right.
think, can
Right.
understand.
You stress the
When you
turnover and the
talk
15 new
about-
teachers.
Yeah, if you talk about money, that's,
Yeah.
I wouldn't, yeah.
Well, you have to. They're connected, so you
You
can
have to
start with
connect
one,
it,
but you
right,
have to
but
go to the.
I think
yeah.
you have to mention it, but I think why are we
Yeah.
thinking about salary? And it's really because we wanna have really good teachers. We wanna have, people that stay, that wanna stay here.
Right.
And that's gonna be better for the children, to have continuation of those teachers.
I couldn't agree more, Jean.
I just think, talking about, yes, it's good to know that the teachers have done these
Yeah.
things, but honestly, I mean, many people, including myself, I mean, you don't get increases every year.
Right.
It just doesn't work that way, it's many years
Yeah.
people go without increases.
So when we're working on our presentation, we'll make sure that is presented in that light. But like I said, I do think they're connected, and that came up last year as people not realizing that the perception is that teachers have gotten their increases every single year and steps, which is traditional in the teaching profession. And so making sure they know that staff have sacrificed through
And I think that's-
furlough days and that kind of, that they've done their part
Well,
to
and
be
you
responsive.
position that as saying, just like many of you,
Yes.
in your
Yes.
own work life,
Exactly.
you, I mean, I went without raises for several years when our
Yeah.
budget was tight, that's,
Yeah.
I mean, and so I think that's something that people will understand.
Right.
I'm not sure it should be, elevated,
Right.
to say, look at the sacrifices
Right.
that they've made, because everybody's been making
Mhm.
sacrifices. And
Yes.
I'm, as a parent, inordinately grateful to the teachers for those sacrifices,
Right.
because I understand how hard teachers work, and all those kinds of things. But I think in terms of getting a message to the community that the community can hear and understand,
Mhm.
and so the impact of that. So they've made sacrifices just like everybody else
Right.
has.
Yeah.
But now we're concerned that we're losing high-quality staff because we're no longer competitive from a salary standpoint, and that's gonna have a negative impact on the consistency and quality of the education we're providing to our kids.
Right.
I would also emphasize that we are really working on making sure that we meet the needs of all of our kids.
Yeah.
And that a lot of the additions in our priority list are targeted towards, making sure that kids don't fall through the cracks
Yeah.
and meeting the needs of our at-risk kids.
Yeah. Excellent. We'll make sure those are in our presentation.
So back to what we were talking about, with the town leader
Yep.
meeting, so are we saying we're going to have that Tuesday and see who is
Uh,
able to come, or
well-
should we try to do some verification? Or-
Yeah, I think what I'll do is I'll have Lauren contact, like, I already know John Hawley has done that. So, make sure that we have a contact with the selectman, and manager for Poland, and also, you know, if Arlen's away, we won't be able to do that with Minot, but we can,
We can still call the town office
yeah.
though and.
Say, is
I
that
can
who else
check-
is planning on-
I can check with the selectmen
Right.
one-on-one to see.
Right.
who's doing it.
yeah, to see who's attending, and then if we find out that people prefer to go to the town meeting right in their town, I'm fine with that, and, if, you know, like I said, we want to,
So you don't know if you're gonna have a meeting next Tuesday night? or-
right now it's planned unless you hear otherwise. And I'll make sure that that message gets out if it's canceled because the town leaders prefer to go to
Somebody
their town
called me
meeting.
today on a cell phone.
Might have been Lauren.
Probably about this meeting.
Yeah, I was outside, I couldn't hear, but
Yeah.
I assumed, I said, I don't have the email, so.
Yes, yeah, so it probably was Lauren. We, like I said, we had all this confusion about whether we had a meeting or not. I said, we better check with everybody to make sure they know that it's on, so. Anything else?
Okay, so I think we're clear in terms of the direction, and do you want to summarize that? Do you want me to, or?
Well, what I heard was that we are going to, bring the, full priority list with the feasibility study and, 5% on the insurance to the board, and have a conversation with them about their support or not, and feedback, and then if we come in at higher than 5% as a school board, we will have to have a conversation about where we find the additional cuts.
And key to the conversation in the school is how to deal with the,
Feasibility.
how we put the feasibility study in there. Okay. Is everybody in
Perfect.
agreement with that?
Thank you very much.
Yep.
It's been a pleasure.
I think it's a good, responsible approach.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep.
And encourage folks to come out to our town meetings. We'll be doing a hard sell here in the next week or two. We'll make sure a phone burst goes out to all parents and all staff. And then we've got flyers around in, you know, some of our local businesses and posted out the town offices. We're asking the schools to put the town budget meetings on their outdoor signs, and maybe we can get the town. April 3rd. Yeah. So a week from, 2 weeks from this Thursday, yeah.
Can we please notice things like in the town stores or
Yes.
stores?
Lauren's been delivering them to some local places.
Is there a way to, over at Wynn Durgan,
Yes.
maybe, I don't know if he covers the school committee meeting, or if you have a school committee meeting on Monday night?
He does when he can.
When he
Yeah.
can.
But you can always give him a call.
Yeah.
Yes, I'll give them a call.
All right, that sounds
You
great.
can stop by the town office